Okay, طبعا راح نكمل إن شاء الله في last topic. So this is topic 9. Um, and last class we have been starting the first slides on topic 9. تقريبا وصلنا لحد slide رقم 5 حد هون أعتقد. So anyway, so this is to and the last point we were discussing about, we talked about the what we call the fundamentals of client server paradigm, أساسيات في مفهوم ال client server. يعني there is one important point that we have discussed that class in the last, in the last time, which was about the security concepts. Um, so we have been defining some security concepts. For example, how can we define the access control on the client server paradigm, giving an example of like two entities A wanted to give a request or like invoke a specific method or service in B. So how access control is implemented, how the authentication as well as the trust, and also we have been going through integrity, confidentiality, accountability, and so on. So those have been actually discussed and have been implemented. So you need to expect this as a kind of a question, by the way. So like whenever you've been asked to discuss about the client server and how like what are the concerns of security in the model, so that's actually the scope of your discussion throughout the 6 points here. And we have been calling whatever interactions between the client and the server, أي interactions ما بتحصل ما بين الكلاينت والسيرفر, it's been termed as invocation. So we can say that a client may invoke a service in the service provider or in the server. Okay, invokes, it means that it accesses and executes a service in the service provider. Okay, so that's actually an extended paradigm, or what we call a fire and forget invocation, where actually we have kind of a middleware. That's not something kind of new to you. We have been actually discussing a lot of scenarios like that, where we have A, B, and C, and B here have been defined as a middleware. A is being defined as a requester, or we call it actually the principal requester, and C, it's been defined as the target, أو اللي هو ال ultimate service provider. Okay, so here when A wanted to invoke C, it has to go through B, meaning that A has to send its request to B, so B has to have an interface which is able to talk to A, and then it actually converts this message into a proper way that can be understood by C, using of course another interface here, which links itself with C. So but here there are some concerns, as we can say. طبعا we call this kind of interaction as an invocation chain. Okay, يعني بمعنى آخر حلقة من invocation. So because you see A is not directly accessing C, but it has to access C through the middleware B, as you can see here. So we have some concerns here. For example, should B use its own identity or A's when talking to C for A's requests? يعني for example, now whenever B wanted to talk to C on behalf of A, what kind of identity should B hold here? يعني هل تستخدم الايدنتيتي الخاصة فيها أو it actually holds the identity of A. So this means that A will need to send its credentials to B, or like it will need to what we call delegate here. And here we can use the term delegation, يعني تفويض بمعنى آخر. Okay, so meaning that A has to delegate its kind of credentials or like part of its attributes to B, so that B can actually talk to C on behalf of A. So that's actually a concern. We call this as a credentials delegation. You need to remember this word, the word delegation, because we're going to talk about it too much in the coming slides. To your information, by the way, students, يعني, as I told you before, the information here are kind of simple and straightforward. So in this session, I'm going to be a little fast. So please just try to pick up with me, and if you have any concern, just do ask me, interrupt me and ask me. But I will be a little fast in this session because we need to cover the whole rest of the slides. Here we have another concern where should A trust B to use its credentials, meaning that the trust here should be built between A and B to trust it, in order for A to send its credentials to B. This whole paradigm, as you can see here, where we have like requester and receiver and having a middleware in the middle, so we call this as fire and forget. it can actually imitate a fire and forget model, whereby that's been defined as an RPC model, whereby the client does not actually expect any response, meaning that A doesn't expect any immediate response. So whenever A is actually sending its request, it should be sure that there are like kind of a series of intermediate nodes who are going to handle the request. So, and there will be a response, but it will not be in a like in an instant time. So A sends a request and does not expect an immediate response. We call this as fire and forget. Um, okay, so now we move to talk about the security and object paradigm. As you know, we have different. طبعا here we talk about the security in object-oriented paradigm. Okay, so object-oriented middleware. Most of the middlewares are actually being defined as an object-oriented paradigm, whereby objects are the main concern, or like objects are the main factor in order to access and invoke services. يعني بيتم استخدام الobject in order for the client to access the middleware, and in order for the middleware to access the specific service. طبعا بيتم عملية اللينكج أو الريفرنسing بيتم باستخدام الobjects. So we have a lot of them over here. Like as an example of middleware, we have CORBA, .NET, and all of them actually are based on object middleware. They have been defined as an object-based middleware system أو object-oriented middleware systems. What does it mean by object-oriented middleware system? As you can read here in the definition. So this means that objects are the main objects are the main entity where it enables the linkage or the invocation process. Objects, طبعا, these are some kind of characteristics. I'm not going to read them ahead. You can just simply read from the slides or refer to the textbook to get them. But let me just highlight the important points here. For example, objects are fine granularity. This means that objects can access like up to a deep level of data. Objects can even access up to the level of the parameter, not only the the system itself. When we say a linkage between B and C, so this means that whenever object is being created in B here, it should be able to access a specific method with a specific parameter in C. And we have been practicing this in the lab, if you remember, in the previous labs. Okay, so we call this as fine granularity. The object is going to the deep level of the service provider in order to get or in order to invoke it. Okay, so objects are actually grouped in policies and they have been controlled by policies. عملية الانvocation بتصير باستخدام policies. So the policies includes kind of requirements, security related requirements that actually mandates what kind of what kind of security to be applied on the objects, to which level the object should access that particular server and so on. So it's a transient, and transient, which is mean that it's it is short-lived. It has a specific time to live, duration. Transient, it means that it can be easily destroyed after the session or like after the invocation process. The object, of course, the object link will be destroyed and rebuilt or regenerated. So of course this will be very beneficial whenever using like examples of shopping systems. طبعا واللي طبعا بنهاية shopping session, of course, whatever objects in the that links the user to the basket, okay, or to the e-basket, of course, by checking out those objects, and all of those data should be actually removed and should be destroyed. Okay, so it may have more than one name, and so of course it provides like more secure way of accessing the resource the object it's referring to. طبعا هذا بيعطينا much more security, because in this case we are not actually using the whole identity of the middleware, okay, but we are using like an object to the class. أو بمعنى آخر, you see, like the benefits of objects in the security. If we don't have objects here, for example, to hold the process between B and C, this means that C needs to send all of its code to B in order for B to execute the code locally. Okay, but having the objects, this means that B can actually create a link to the class here in order to remotely execute the class on C without the need to to move the whole code into C, into some other entity or like into some other system. We have some challenges for object-based systems. As you read here, it is difficult to determine which security policies to be given, and that's actually kind of a challenge here. Of course, it's difficult to understand which actual resources are manipulated on the object. So, which means that, how can we use this object, for which resource this object can be used and can be determined. All right. So moving ahead, so we have here the middleware security stack. طبعا that's very important stack, particularly what you can see here, the shaded areas, starting from the ORB and security services, from the client side and also from the server side, where we have skeleton, ORB and security services. All these shaded areas, these are the heart of the middleware. Whatever other layers on top and underneath that, those will be kind of like assistive layers that actually assist the whole operation of the middleware work, or like the middleware operation. ولكن what we can say that the main importance here comes to the ORB and security service. Anyway, we're going to discuss all of them one by one, what's going to be in the next slides. So starting with the application, client application, that's actually kind of the environment where the end user is actually handling. هو عبارة عن application where the end user itself, it actually interacts with. Here we have a server application also, that's also from the other side. And as we have a client application, we need to have a server application where the human, or like the user, the end user who is actually administrating the server, should be able to interact with the received calls. So application server, this is the runtime. The application server here, that's actually the environment where the server is working on, some kind of like an IDE. For example, one of the runtimes that we may use here, for example, NetBeans, or maybe Oracle, some kind of Oracle software environment. So this actually kind of an environment in order to run the server functionalities. We have also the proxy. Of course, that's actually a very important agent here, okay, or a very important component which works on behalf, which works for the behalf of the client, where it actually handles all the client requests without the need to refer to the client itself from asking much more details. So that's actually the main point where actually the proxy, where actually the calls to the web service happens. Okay, so it happens from the proxy, the client proxy, to the web service, instead of initiating them from the application. طبعا, of course, this will hold a lot of complexities on behalf of the client. As you can see here and read, these are like the main definitions. So it implements a remote server object on the client. طبعا, this is where we actually initiate the objects to the class, to the server class. We also have the skeleton. This is actually in the server side, where processes like marshalling, unmarshalling, are happening. And by the way, here we define marshalling as that's the process of transforming the bytes, the bytes of the data into a standard object format before sending them. Okay, so it's like how to how to manipulate and align those kind of signals, or like the binary data, into kind of an object format. Something like JSON, where we have used the JSON in order to to reformat a specific shape of data into another shape that could be understood by the by the other web services using XML libraries. We have also object adapter. This is also a runtime environment for for the server, which actually handles the request and assigning the object ID. Looks like that this is actually a third party for having an object IDs. And we come down to the ORB, or what we call object request broker. And as I told you, that's actually the heart of the middleware, or we call it the core of the middleware, because it handles the most critical functionalities. For example, the composition of message, editing of message, creation of the message, determining where the message should be sent to, providing all the security related data in the header of the message, establishing the virtual sessions, ensuring that those virtual sessions are only being established between the legitimate parties, whether the party is being a middleware client, or maybe ultimate server. dispatching the requests to the server if it is actually being delegated by the client. And if this kind of ORB is being delegated by a client, of course, it should dispatch the requests to the server objects. Link those requests to the objects in the server. Of course, here we have also the security service. So those are actually the rest of the the layers here. As I told you before, these are kind of complementary layers in order to complete the work of the middleware. As you can see, some of them is related to the implementation. Yani whatever after security service here, this will be 1, 2, 3 here, the 3 layers. That will be the layers which are actually concerning the implementation part, or like the infrastructure part. As you can see here, mechanism of implementation, how to also link this kind of implementation to the operating system drivers, and then from the drivers of the operating system to all the way down to the real network or the physical network. So where actually the actual message is being moved through the wire or the wireless, depends on the medium of the communication. Okay, so we move to talk about the how middleware systems implement security. I would like you to remember this this big title here, because it could be actually a question in your exam. The main title here, the main heading here, discuss how middleware systems implement the security. So the discussion here will be like very prolonged, where it actually contains the distributed authentication, we have distributed protection, distributed access control, and also distributed auditing, and we have the delegation, which is actually a very important concept that you need to know. So all of those are actually being covered under that topic, or like under this kind of discussion that you should actually handle. Okay, so please just take care of the main headings, because there might be kind of a scenario where you need to discuss in kind of a long answer question. Alright, so here starting with the distributed authentication, where we define, of course here, when we say distributed authentication, that's basically the authentication itself, but like in a distributed fashion, meaning that, how to implement authentication in in a system where we have a client server and multiple middleware in the middle. Okay, and that's actually very kind of common to you, because we have been also discussing this before. Anyway, to recall back from this, so authentication, it means that how the different entities are actually verify their own identity to one another. How a client can verify its identity to the middleware, and how a middleware can identify its identity to the server, and also the vice versa process. وكذلك والعكس بالعكس. So this has been done by using an encrypted session key, or kind of maybe a certificate, as we have been discussing in the previous chapter. How the certificates are being created and generated, of course, that is also another point that you need to put in your mind. If you want to know more information about that, you just refer to the previous chapter about this. We have authentication protocols. طبعا these are the product, like for example SSL, SSH. We have also HTTPS, depends on the layer where the protocol is being implemented. Okay, so as you know, the protocol, if you want to define them, they've been defined as a set of procedure, meaning that it's up like a programmable classes where they provide a specific procedures and regulations to to determine the level of authentication to be applied. So examples of those: symmetric key, symmetric shared key, and also we have the PKI. So these kind of, how can we determine what is the proper method? The proper method of the protocol. So this can be determined by either two ways. First of all, advertised by the server to the client, or having a special negotiation between both client and server, or like between the middleware and the server, where the middleware is actually talking on behalf of the on the client. We have message protection, and message protection here is being fulfilled by 3 main concepts, or like 3 main what we call techniques. First of all, authenticity, or like the message authentication using the session key. We have confidentiality, where encryption should be applied into the into the created session between the 2 communicating nodes, and also the message integrity. And let's just let's not forget that the integrity here, it's about like, ensuring that no one has changed the message, no one has changed the message contents. So this is why here, by building the confidentiality here, we are actually making sure that integrity has been applied. We have also some policies for the message protection. As you can see here, we have object owners policy, we have system owner policy. So object owner policy here, it actually provides the related what we call the related policies, the related security policies that actually secures the object. We have also the system owner policy, that's actually for the whole platform, how to enable the policy to cover the security issues for the whole platform, and also for the principals. Principals mean here the main requester. What are the requirements for the requester to fulfill in order to ensure the security of the transaction? Coming down to the access control, and here we have like two functions in the access control. We have, first of all, the authorization, or like making the decision, making the access control decision, and then implementing this decision or enforcing the decision. Okay, so those are the two main functions to be implemented under the access control. So the first one here, it pertains to what we call authorization. So it figures out the policies. Yani here in the first step, or like in the first function, those policies, like all the related policies are being determined, trying to pick out the specific policy in order to follow, and then here implementing that kind of policy by using specific actions. So I guess if I move you here to this figure, that will actually show a clearer idea on what do we mean here. So as you can see here on the receive request, so this receive request will have, that's the middleware system here, the main rectangle. So it has two components in terms of the access control. So first of all, the selected, the specific policy is being selected here by the enforcing function. And then after this, decision function here provide a specific decision on the policy by inspecting the parameters that are being held by the access request. Then these decision will be given back to the enforcement function in order to apply on action, whether to allow, whether to deny, whether to actually allow with restriction, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's from the interaction that happens between enforcement function and decision function. So decision request here, getting the decision by the enforcement function, and then providing the providing the specific decision in implementation. So the policy is being made of statements. So as I told you before, the statements here can be in form of a granting statement, denying access statement, or like allowing with a restrictive access statement. So these statements contain references. The references are should be gathered in two methods. Okay, so who's the one who's gathering the references? Those are actually the those are the clients, or the principal. So it's being gathered in two methods. For example, push or pull. Okay, so push, it's like the clients that needs the information, that sends the information, without the without the request of the middleware, or like without the request of that intermediate node. It's the client that sends the requirements on on advance before it's being called. Pull, it's like the middleware which actually requests for the the specific information, requests the client to provide a specific information. Okay, here we move to distributed auditing. And in auditing here we talk about the accountability and trying to detect any form of policy violation, or like any form of policy action which has not been implemented properly, or it has not been complied properly by the by either the communicating parties. Accountability here, it's like about holding the users for their own actions. Whoever is actually doing a specific action in a scenario, that particular component should be responsible for that, and it should admit that that the action has been done by him, being a client, being a server, or like either being a middleware. Okay, so accountability should be there, because you see, once we have fulfilled the accountability, so this means that a specific solutions for any issue will be, it can be possible. But if like imagine like in a system where we don't have like any kind of origin for that specific action, that will be of course very tough and tedious task, trying to identify what is the origin of the problem, or like what is the origin of any issue that has been caused. Detection of the security policy violation كذلك, if there are any kind of violations يعني اختراقات أو يعني trying to do something beyond the policy, so that also can be identified by the auditing. يعني عملية الauditing هي عملية رقابة بامتياز. Okay, so it's like trying to monitor the whole system, record the events, and use those recorded events properly. So in order to record the events here, we use the audit log, and that's actually kind of an expected term. So that's kind of a repository, okay, where actually different terms with different categories of terms, or like different categories of events, has been are to be recorded and created and collected and saved in a in kind of an archiving manner. So the main role of the log form, as you can read ahead here, so it creates a general level of the framework. It defines the related users and their authorized activities, trying to recheck again, and try to re-emphasize on each user on what is its authorized activities. Also detect violations on the security policies. That's a very important question. This is a really kind of important question here, which I put it in form of a discussion. It asks that the distributed nature of middleware system makes the security auditing more challenging task. Discuss why. In other words, why do you think auditing, it's not like a kind of a straightforward task, or like a point-to-point task? Of course, there are many points here to be discussed. More details, you can refer them if you go to page number 170. Okay, you can just read more information about that. But first of all, like, let me just wrap up the points. So the challenging, or the challenging tasks, or the challenges that makes the auditing kind of not easy activity, it is because actually the systems are actually heterogeneous, and different systems may hold different requirements. Okay, and we also have a lot of services that might be provided from each and every single entity, being a client or being a server. That's number one. It is difficult also to maintain a global time across the distributed components, particularly if you're talking about like a system which is distributed over geographical areas. So that's actually another challenge. Here, like the what we call the goal of having kind of a centralized auditing, it makes it also difficult, because here we may have problems related to the performance. For example, delay, synchronous auditing, trying to make all the entities being audited, or like record or report events in the same time. So of course that will be kind of difficult and very expensive in terms of performance. Lack of guarantees that an event has been logged. Okay, so also here the guarantee, like what is how many percentage that we are actually certain or sure that this, all the events has been recorded. Also types of events, should all the events be recorded, or specific kinds of events to be recorded? So this will of course provide much higher volume of storage and repository to be allocated there. These points and all the other points, they are all kind of challenging tasks, which are being even investigated by the research, by actually the those kind of developing organizations who are developing standards and and middleware. They're actually investigating them daily in order to find solutions, and yet solutions are not really kind of 100% working. Distributed delegation, and that's actually the concept where we talk about like, how am I going to let someone to talk on my behalf? That's you may understand it as simple as that. Okay, how am I how am I going to enable someone to talk on my behalf, okay, to someone else? So this is what we mean by delegation, بمعنى آخر التفويض. Okay, so we have two different types of delegation when we talk about the web services and distributed systems. We have delegation of responsibilities, like as a client, he is actually delegating the middleware in order to hold a specific responsibilities or a specific action where the middleware will can interact with the server by performing specific actions. For example, making the login. Finalizing a purchase, online purchase. You know, or maybe like for example, verifying the receipt of the order and so on. Delegation of credentials. That's actually to enable the.
excuse me دكتور.
Yes.
أنت
تفضل.
مشارك معنا الشاشة؟
Did I? Um,
No I think.
it's very good that you noted now, after like half an hour.
لا دكتور نبيتك من البداية في الشات وأنت ما شفته.
آه يعني لو تكلمت بالأول كان أفضل يعني بيكون بدون الشات لأنه as you see I'm not really referring to the chatting. Anyway, يعني من حسن الحظ إنه صراحة أنا مسجل السيشن هاي. So I guess the session will be captured and I will send you the video. Okay? Is my screen clear to you?
Yes نعم.
تمام شكرا حسينة. Okay, we have delegation of credentials where it's actually like much more important. طبعا credentials, it means that delegation of the access, like the access information, the login information, certificates, the short keys. Okay, so those are all being referred to as credentials. So that might be also another type of credentials. So delegation of credentials should be actually highlighted as one of the important delegations here, because here there should be kind of a negotiation between the client and the middleware, to which how credentials are going to be used. So as a client which sends an incoming request, um, as a client which send an incoming request here to the middleware, let's imagine that this is the middleware system over here. Okay, so the middleware need to decide. So should it use its the client credentials, or should it depend on its own credentials? Okay, or maybe it actually use an invocation credentials. So we have like different choices here that might happen. So what makes delegation of a significant role in distributed systems? Of course, it enables the final target applications to learn the true identity of the requester. Okay, and I mean that it makes the server to learn about like what is the real identity of the server if we have used a specific type of delegation. طبعا إذا تم اختيار نوع معين من الdelegation. And also um, it allows the initiator credentials to be dynamically assigned. Okay, whereby like one client may actually delegate its credentials to more than one middleware, or like more than one intermediate party, where this intermediate parties can actually talk also to different servers. So using what we call one copy of credentials. So here this is also another important point which we talk about the levels of delegation. طبعا first of all, the first level here is that no delegation. This means that the client cannot permit any of its credentials to the server. To the middleware, where we have the client, the middleware, and the server here. So the client will assume that there is no delegation. It can actually contact the server immediately without having this kind of transaction through the middleware. Simple delegation here, as you can read, and maybe it's like much clearer when we talk about when we see the picture here. So a simple delegation, which means the client actually sends its credentials, and the intermediate object can actually use its own credentials. يعني so the intermediate object or the middleware receives the client credentials, and it can actually talk to the server using using the middleware credentials instead of sending the client credentials. يعني at the end the target server will not know what are the client credentials. Okay, we have also composite delegation. So it's like what we call the complementary step of the first level, where the client sends its credentials to the middleware, and the middleware here will use the client credentials instead of its own credentials to talk to the target server. So here the target server will be able to know and learn what is the real identity of the client. Okay, and we have what we call the traced delegation, where it's kind of a combination between like level 2 and level 3, where the client send its credentials to the middleware, and the middleware will use the client credentials plus its own credentials in order to talk to the server. And that will be like much more, that's actually the strongest way, or like this is the most secure way of the target in order to verify, because at the end the target will need to verify who is this entity and who is that entity. So by sending credentials for both client and the middleware, so the target server will actually get the highest level of verification for both entities that is going to communicate to. Okay, so now we move to another point, or another part here, talking about the distributed system administration. So we have طبعا you see the administration of the what we call the security. It is actually really a must when we particularly when we talk about the distributed system, where we have like different entities, okay, should be managed by maybe a middleware or like more than one middleware. So here we need to actually have kind of an administrative party. So most of the scenarios will have like kind of a third party, as what we can as what we have been discussing before, an example of a third party which is able to issue the certificates of security. نفس الشيء نفس المثال. Okay, so kind of a similar way that we may have a third party here in order which actually manages the security by linking to all the systems. يعني kind of a centralized unit in order to manage the credentials, manage the policies, manage the different tokens which are being given to the rest of the communicating points. طبعا absence of administrative capabilities, you can read them ahead over here, due to the time limit, of course, and this is very simple and straightforward for you. You can simply review them. We have, for example, limited resources. We can actually proliferation of security breaches, زيادة breaches and attacks, okay, increasing the cost of ownership. So all of those are actually problems that may occur if we do not have administrative capabilities. Okay, security policies are based on types of security mechanisms. So we have different policies, as you can see here. طبعا in order to make administration being implemented correctly, we need of course to have different policies. We need to have an authentication policy, and what do we use this policy for? We may have an attribute policy, those policies that can actually enable the security of the attributes, the passing attributes, يعني how objects are being related to a specific attribute, a parameter in the function itself of the server. Message protection policy, authorization policy. We have also auditing policies, credentials delegation policies. Okay, so what you need to observe here is that it is very hard that to have one global policy which can govern all the access to the resources. يعني it's like kindly almost impossible that we may have all these policies being gathered in one document where it can actually give the access. So this is why here we have what we call policy domains, where it actually achieves kind of like a grouping of groupings of the policies. Some related policies might be actually grouped together in what we call a domain policy, and this domain policy will be linked to a specific group of users. So as you can read here, enterprise resource and users can be partitioned into groups, okay, and then those groups can actually be linked to a specific policies. So here these are some advantages of the policies of the policy domains. Why do we need to implement policy domains instead of like actual policy? Okay, this is of course to improve the administration, help achieving scalability, and we can easily actually include many service providers as well as clients into the system, and having them well monitored by the policies, by the by the restrictions of the system, enable delegation administration as well. Also here, part of this discussion could be related to the fine-grained security. So what do we mean by fine-grained security? So this is the ability of allowing different components to the application to realize the different security requirements. So how to realize those requirements? It is by digging deep all the way down until we reach the what kind of data that can be held by a specific parameter in the method here. Okay, so we call this like as fine-grained security. So there should be a security assertion that actually guides what what is the encryption level of this parameter to be considered, and so on. So each user, so here of course we use the domain policies in order to enforce fine grain. So fine grain security can be applied and realized by using the domain policies, where each user account may have a separate domain policy. However, this will actually be kind of, expensive in terms of like having an authorization. We cannot actually have, I mean, an immediate authorization, because in this case each user will have its own domain policies. So imagine that if we have like more than one user in the system and the users are scaling up, so there will be like kind of a problem in authenticating the different users to these domain policies. So here we use delegation as a solution in order to allow separate back office to the in order to separate back office to the server to enforce and check based on the caller credentials. Meaning that, so grouping of users are being added, okay, and these group of users will be actually linked to a specific policy, which can actually provide links to other set of policies. So we call this as a domain policy. Alright, so here we talk about CORBA. So that's the طبعا CORBA, this is like one of the legacy middleware systems. It has been used since very long time, and it's still actually being used due to its importance and due to its kind of scalability. CORBA it's still being used until the day, because it actually what we call gathers, or like it combines between the legacy systems and the modern systems. It is able to provide a straightforward security. It can be easily edited and improved. So anyway, defining CORBA, طبعا first of all, it's a third party or a middleware. يعني that's the basic definition here. طيب, what does it mean? I mean, like in more details, it is a general purpose language and operating system independent infrastructure for developing and deploying the distributed object based systems in a broad range of specialized application. يعني it doesn't relate to any specific system. It has been implemented as an open source that can be actually improved and scaled up. So CORBA security specification, طبعا هذا عبارة عن موديل للكوربا in order to be implemented in CORBA. So this is kind of a specification. It defines a framework. طبعا هو عبارة عن framework which provides the security services for the application. يعني CORBA is a middleware, ولكن CORBA security هو عبارة عن framework which actually provide more security, or like it provides the security to the required to the middleware. يعني هذا هو عبارة عن security enhancement which should be added to the CORBA. So the security, it's been actually applied over two levels. We have level 1 security and level 2. Okay, طبعا of course level 1 will be the basic security requirements. طبعا الليفل مقصود فيه هو الليفل of requirements، يعني شو مستوى السكيورتي اللي ممكن يتم اللي ممكن يتم عملية الضبط أو توليفه داخل اللي هو middleware itself. So if we implement level 1 security, so here we're able to support a security on our application. يعني meaning that CORBA or the middleware will be able to provide a security for the application message itself, trying to secure or maybe like encrypt the message itself. Having ORB enforced authentication, كذلك authentication, secure invocation, and authorization, those will be actually handled by level 1. Performing also simple delegation will be supported by CORBA. وعرفنا شو يعني simple delegation from the previous slides. In level 2, security will be a little more complicated and a little more detailed here, providing or supporting security aware applications, providing security for all the applications actually, having the ability to select a quality of protection. كذلك what we can say, the protection level, the encryption level will be kind of customizable. It's based on the scenario itself. يعني ممكن نختار درجة معينة من اللي هو security and the restrictions to be added. Also changing the credentials will be possible. Okay, and also it will also support the administration interface, where like kind of like a centralized entity can be used in order to control different middleware systems. Okay, يعني we can use a third party here for CORBA in order to control different middleware system. طبعا هذا بيكون في حال ما يكون في عندنا يعني different clients with different middleware trying to contact to different systems. Okay, Okay, in order to study CORBA well we have two parts. يعني زي ما تتذكروا كيف عندنا في الويب سيرفيس عرفنا انه الويب سيرفيس it's being contained, it contains or it actually composed of two parts, the interface and the implementation. Similar thing here will be but with different terms. interface بنشير لها بالديكلاريتيف بارت، يعني هي تعمل بمثابة الانترفيس للكوربا. بمعنى آخر that's the place where the different entities or like the different details of CORBA will be identified. يعني بتعطي معلومات أو details عن you know about the system itself. Okay, about the operation, about the attributes, about the exceptions that can be used. Okay, so it also provides kind of you know a computing model that actually defines what are the requirements from the client and what are the requirements from the server. And here the runtime part, that's actually the part where the implementation may occur. So here it's like deploying the CORBA objects by utilizing the CORBA middleware in the form of ORB. طبعا بتم عملية اللي هو deployment باستخدام ال ORB. Okay, object runtime brokers. Okay, so CORBA ORB is responsible for forcing a middleware functions. طبعا اتكلمنا عن ال ORB سابقا. You see, in the previous what we call slide. If you go back to the slides where we have the layer stack of CORBA or of the middleware, we have been defining those, so you can refer to those plus you know these kind of functions. We have also the wire protocol. طبعا CORBA, of course, in order to send and receive messages between itself and either the client or the target server, it has to use a specific set of procedures أو ما يسمى بالبروتوكول. في عنا protocol هنا يستخدم داخل الميدلوير, we call it generic enter ORB protocol. So this enables CORBA to ORBs to communicate with each other. ممكن يتم الاتصال ما بين one middleware and another middleware. يعني تحديدا في بعض السيناريوهات اللي ممكن يكون في عندنا أكثر من middleware in the way of the message here. Okay, if we have like this is middleware 1 and 2. Okay, so we may use like this kind of protocol in order to initiate the communication between these different systems. So we have, of course, a specific message structure that should be built between middleware 1 and 2, or like between the different middleware using this kind of protocol. So it is exchanged between the sender and the receiver. ORB translates the requests. So those are the main functionality of this kind of protocol. Object references. So enable the CORBA object to access the client طبعا باستخدام references. Okay, أو باستخدام طبعا الريفرنس هو عبارة عن الأوبجكت over here. Okay, أو يعني عبارة عن تعريف للأوبجكت. So that's kind of like a definition of the object into the class itself. So ORB has a list of components which allows the additional information to be attached to the IOR اللي هو احنا بنسميه interoperable object reference. طبعا هذا الكومبوننت اللي يستخدم في عملية الريفرنسنج أو عملية الانفوكيشن. We have kind of responsibilities. So CORBA client security service provides a following the following function. طبعا you can imagine it like this. You see, this is an interface here to the client. يعني لحتى أبسط لكم السيناريو أكتر. And that's actually an interface here to the server. That's actually the service provider over here. And that's actually the client over here. So the client when actually communicating to the middleware, طبعا هذا CORBA بنسميه احنا الميدلوير باختصار. Okay, when communicating to the middleware, of course it should communicate through this kind of interface. So what are the security related functions that this middleware, that this interface should actually maintain in order to comply or in order to make the client comply to the security comply to the security framework whenever sending the request. Okay, so these are the responsibilities that the client actually should be able to fulfill here, or like these are the responsibilities. Yani if the client does not actually reach the level of security in its communication, CORBA throughout this kind of interface, it has to fulfill these. It has to make sure that all these functions are fulfilled. Obtaining the principal credentials, translating the principal credentials, creating the secure channel. طبعا هذه كلها وظيفة اللي هي الانترفيس هاي او الجزء اللي بيختص ب اللي هو الكلاينت itself. Also طبعا you can read them ahead يعني nothing there is nothing new in this kind of detail. It is just to list down the list of functionalities. And also we have another list of functions that can be provided on the TSS أو بيسمى بالtarget target secure server. It provides the following function اللي هو هذا. Let me come on here. So that's actually the interface, or like this is the part where it actually talks to the service provider. So what are the list of functionalities that should be provided by this I mean like by this component of the middleware. Okay, so many components of them. طبعا في يعني there are kind of common components that can be actually that we can find as shared between the client I mean like the client service side and the server service side. Finally, we have the last point here, which is about how to implement CORBA security functions. And for that, I think again we have all the concepts here, we have been studying them before. It's just like to re-emphasize on them and how they are actually being implemented. So first of all, authentication. So authentication is being implemented, of course, by capturing the data such as security name, authorization data in terms of certificate, and also we need to have a request of privileges attributes. So this is actually what CORBA can collect from the client. So here we use what we call CORBA SIC. Okay, so that's of course a security framework as we have been defined before in order to implement all these kind of concepts. مش بس authentication and also message integrity, access control, and so on. So in message integrity, it uses the session keys in order to perform the message encryption. So integrity and confidentiality are referred to the quality of protection. يعني providing these two kind of concepts, or like fulfilling the kind of concepts here, it actually improves the level of protection. We have also access control. So access control provides the specific rights and a specific what we call a specific privileges that can be given to the resources that can be given to the clients in order to access the resources. يعني we have a specific resources here, that's the middleware, and this is the client. Okay, the client may send a request to the middleware. The middleware will actually take the request here with a specific access control to the resources. تخيلوا معي ان الريسورسز عبارة عن مثلا methods. Okay, and these methods actually will need to have a specific access. So should the client access only to all the methods as one shot, or maybe access to a specific method؟ طبعا عن طريق الميدلوير بالتأكيد. So here we have kind of a group access control as what we have been discussing before. If you remember in the previous slide we talk about the domain policy. وظيفة domain policy انه we need to group a specific, we can actually group related users who are actually having an access to the specific components. مثال على ذلك مثلا يعني the students مثلا more than one students may access a specific resources مثلا. Okay, مثلا resources related to the Moodle مثلا, resources related to EduWave and their grades. Okay, but they may not actually have an access to other resources, for example the financial resources, for example the management services. طبعا هاي المقصود فيها. So those kind of users, for example the students, the different students as a clients, they can be grouped in one group and actually being given access to a specific resources. Okay, يعني هي عملية تجميع لكلاينتس باختلاف او حسب اللي هو طبيعة اللي هو الاكسس requests اللي مطلوبة منهم او اللي ممكن تكون مخولة لهم, and then trying to assign them to a specific resources. So here we have different access rights طبعا: set, get, manage, and use. Okay, set, of course, this is to set what kind of access level to be used. Okay, طبعا this is being assigned by the server. Get, that's for the client. In order to get that right, the client need to know what kind of level, what kind of access level it should get. Manage, so of course this is actually to display all the list of resources. طبعا هي عبارة عن functions داخل الميدلوير أو ممكن تكون داخل السيرفر itself. So manage, this means like listing list of whole list of the users with their own privileges, and then use meaning that it activates using that particular permission. So activate the permission, I mean like activate permitting or activate the denying request. Okay. So to invoke operation, as you can read here, so the subject should obtain the access right. طبعا هو اللي هاي بنسميها access rights. Okay, so these access rights um, on a required operation طبعا أو required service احنا بنسميها إما operation أو service. Okay, and then after this, so after this the invocation may happen. يعني عملية الاتصال بالسيرفيس ممكن تحصل. Auditing, of course, here we have auditing channel and auditing decision. So auditing channel, this is actually to control or to collect what we call all the related data from the different events. هاي بتتم باستخدام component يسمى auditing channel داخل الكوربا طبعا. Okay. So it is to write the audit record, maintain the records, and then the auditing decision, that's actually the process of analysis into the audited channel. تم عملية تحليل الaudited channel, trying to know what are those kind of events that has been collected, and then enforcing a specific decision باستخدام policy معينة. Okay. So auditing policies divide all the events into two major classes. طبعا بتم تقسيم events هاي اللي تم جمعها باستخدام channel here into two classes. طبعا either related to the system, events that may relate to the system, أو events which may relate to the application. السيستم اللي هو runtime, the whole runtime application, the whole runtime software, أو الapplication itself اللي هو نوع المسج. Is this message kind of an email message, kind of like a web mail message, multimedia message? What kind of message is that? So we call this as an application security. And finally, we have the delegation. That's actually the last point. So we're different. Excuse me if I just take a long time, because I really have to finish this chapter.
Doctor,
yes, Matter.
can I leave because I have another class? No.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if like you have a class, yeah, you can leave. But anyway, يعني هذه آخر سلايد يعني زي ما انتم شايفين هون. Okay.
Okay.
So delegation here. طبعا زي ما بتعرفوا الكلاس راح يكون مسجل، فبالتالي I'm going to send you the record of the class. So if you are missing any parts, of course you can come back to them. طبعا we already know what is delegation، يعني عملية التفويض. So here how can we implement delegation in CORBA? It is like by using different levels of CORBA SIC. Of course, by using the different levels of delegation here. طبعا you need to know that different compliance level of CORBA should actually provide a different types of delegation, require support for different types of delegation. So this means that different security levels may have different delegation levels. يعني كل delegation level بيعطي security level معين. And then we have also here different technologies. طبعا بيعتمد على طبيعة التكنولوجيا المستخدمة. Okay. Which implements that used to implement the CORBA SIC. It also can identify the different support for the delegation. Okay, so different technologies that might be used in order to مثلا for example to create the session key, PKI مثلا, what we call SSL. What kind of technology, what kind of security technology has been implemented? This will also affect the delegation procedure. So CORBA support delegation in the following ways. There are two ways: authorization of the token, واللي طبعا بنسميها هي delegation of attributes. طبعا واللي بيتم فيها it defines a simple delegation طبعا where the obtained token are allowed client to perform a delegation to the attributes. Okay. طبعا هاي بتحصل زي ما احنا عارفين يعني as what we have been seen before. So trying to the client will delegate its resources or like its attributes to the middleware, and then what we call the middleware will actually use its own the middleware will actually use its own credentials in order to talk to the server. So that's actually the simple delegation. Identifying the assertion based delegation. طبعا here this is actually the matter of impersonation. طبعا هذه هي حالة impersonation where طبعا هذه بنسميها احنا composite delegation, where actually the client will send its credentials and then the server, I mean like the middleware, will act as a client when communicating to the server. Okay, the client the middleware here will act as a client. يعني بمعنى آخر the client will impersonate. Okay, بيتقمص شخصية الميدلوير، بيتقمص شخصية الكلاينت whenever talking to the server. This is why here, in order to implement this level of delegation, there should be a very high trust between the client and the middleware. If there is no trust here, of course, this will be very dangerous and it may cause kind of a security breaches. Okay, so this is all actually in this chapter. Thank you so much for your listening, and excuse me if I just get late in the explanation. I was trying to explain things as as easy as possible and as brief as possible for you. طبعا التفاصيل عندكم في الشابتر كذلك في التكست book. If you want to refer them, you can just go to the textbook and slide. في حدا عنده أي سؤال? If you're here listening. Do you have any question, students?
No, Doctor, thank you.
Okay, so I really wish you all the best.